are doing the May June 2022 Economics AS level paper 1 variant 3. So let's jump right into it. The first one, it says which statement about money is correct. A, it says deflation reduces the internal purchasing power of money. It is incorrect. Deflation increases the internal purchasing power of money. When average price level goes down, this means people can buy more with the same amount of money. Therefore, the internal purchasing power of money, which is the purchasing power of money in the internal economy, that increases. It does not reduce in deflation. So A is incorrect. B, it says most financial assets are more liquid than physical assets. Now, financial assets examples include cash, stocks, bonds, and bank deposits. All these examples, they are financial assets. And why are they more liquid than physical assets? Physical assets like which include cars, machinery. This is because the amount of activity is generally quite high in the market for financial assets, which means there is high volumes of trade in there, so it will be much easier to change these assets for money or for other types of goods and services. So therefore financial assets are more liquid than physical assets. C, when money acts as a medium of exchange, it requires a double coincidence of wants. It is completely incorrect, because when money acts as a medium of exchange, it is used as a means to trade for goods. For example, if a person wants to buy shampoo from a particular shop, he will give that retailer money, and in return he will get the shampoo. So he does not have to exchange goods for goods, so it does not require a double coincidence of wants of a similar good. Therefore it is completely incorrect. D, it says when money acts as a store of value, it must be unlimited in supply. A store of value means money is a unit of measurement of the value of particular goods and services. For example, if a calculator is valued at $10, it means that the money is used to measure the value that the calculator provides, so the money acts as a store of value. It does not require the quantity of good to be unlimited in supply. It is with a limited supply that money acts as a store of value. So B is our correct option. 2, it says the table shows the amount of direct taxes that different households in the UK paid in 2017 to 2018. Now, which positive economic statement can be made from the table? Positive statements are fact-based and they're not opinions. So let's see. A, direct tax is unfair on the richer households in the UK. This is definitely a normative statement, because how do we measure if something is unfair or it is fair? It differs for different people, so it is a normative statement, it is an opinion. B, it says direct tax in the UK is a proportional tax. When we calculate it out, it is a progressive tax, not a proportional tax. In C, poor households do not pay enough direct tax in the UK. Again, it is a normative statement, because what is enough and what is not enough may be different for different people. So it is again a normative statement. D, rich households pay more direct tax than poor households in the UK. This is correct, because as we can see, the top 20% of households pay £21,200 of direct tax, and the bottom 20% of households pay £2,000 direct tax per year. So we definitely can see that the rich has paid more tax than the poor households in the UK. So D is our correct option for 2. 3, it says what does opportunity cost measure? A, the benefits of a good compared with the next choice. It is not the accurate definition of opportunity cost. B, it says the benefits given up by not consuming the next best alternative. This is correct one, because in a world of scarcity we have to make choices. For example, if I want to attend a class and I also have the option to play football, What happens is that if I attend the class, the next best alternative in that time, which is the football that I would have played otherwise, becomes the opportunity cost, because the benefits that I gave up due to attending that class is the football that I would have played. So therefore, the benefits that football would have given me, which is the entertainment or the exercise, that is now given up. So that becomes the opportunity cost of attending the class. So this is very accurate. C, it says the cost of any good not chosen. No, it is not correct, because there could be a lot of goods, but we specifically have to look at our choices, and then we can determine what is the opportunity cost for a certain action. D, the financial cost of consuming a good. That is completely incorrect. So 3B is the answer. 4, it says which term assumes the existence of qualities, knowledge, and skills that allow an individual to be more productive. This is definitely talking about human capital, because human capital means it is defined as the qualities, the knowledge, the skills, the experience of a labor. So I think human capital, let's say A is enterprise investment. No, it is not the answer. B, human capital. This is the correct answer. 4B is the answer. 5, it says the diagrams relate to the markets for 4 different products. In which market would a 10% decrease in demand and simultaneously a 10% increase in supply definitely result in both a fall in equilibrium price and a rise in equilibrium quantity? Now they're saying that there is a 10% decrease in demand, and along with that, simultaneously, there is a 10% increase in supply. Now, in most cases, if there is a 10% decrease in demand and a 10% increase in supply, the quantity traded, or the equilibrium quantity, would stay the same, because there are opposite changes with the same quantity. So a decrease and an increase that are equal to each other would result in a zero change in the equilibrium quantity, but in certain cases it differs. Now they are saying that it also results in a fall in the equilibrium price and a rise in equilibrium quantity. Now, in all of these scenarios that they've given, which one causes a fall in equilibrium price and a rise in equilibrium quantity if there is a 10% decrease in demand and a 10% increase in supply? A shows that the supply is perfectly inelastic. For example, if there is a 10% decrease in demand, the quantity traded, or the equilibrium quantity, will stay the same at this point, but the price will fall from this point P to this point P1. Now if there is a 10% increase in the supply, what will happen is that the price will fall further, but the quantity demanded will rise to this point. We can name it Q1. If initially it was Q, let's assume. So there is a rise in quantity and a fall in price. So this is our correct option, A. In B, we can see if there is a 10% decrease in aggregate demand like this, what will happen if initially the price was P, the price will become P1 and the quantity will become Q1 if initially the quantity was just Q. So the quantity has fallen and the price has fallen. Now after a 10% increase in supply, what will happen is that the quantity will return back about to its original position, because there is a 10% fall and then there's a 10% increase. Definitely the equilibrium quantity would be the same, but there would be a fall in price, as we can see. So B is incorrect. In C, if there is a 10% decrease in demand, the price will fall from P to P1, and the quantity will fall from Q to Q1, and after a 10% increase in supply, the quantity will stay at the same position, which is a fall from Q to Q1, but the price will further fall to P2. Now the equilibrium price is falling from P to P2, but the quantity has also fallen, which is not the criteria of the question. They're asking the quantity has to increase. So C is also incorrect. And finally, if we decrease the demand by 10% in D, the price stays the same, but the equilibrium quantity falls from Q to Q1. And if there is a 10% increase in supply, the price will fall to P1, and the quantity demanded will rise back to about nearly the position of Q, because if there is a 10% decrease in demand, that will decrease the equilibrium quantity by 10%, and if there is a 10% increase in supply, that will increase the equilibrium quantity by 10%, cancelling out the effect of the decrease in demand, and thus the equilibrium quantity stays the same as it initially was, but the price falls from P to P1. So D is also incorrect, and our correct option is A. 6, it says the supply of a new drug to relieve muscle pain is very inelastic over a short period of time. The supply of printed newspapers is much more elastic over the same time period. What could explain the difference in elasticity of supply of the drug and printed newspapers in this time period? A, it says with new drug the cost per unit is low. This is incorrect. The cost per unit would be high if it is a new drug, which would definitely require huge development and research costs. So cost per unit cannot be low, and that is incorrect. B, it says discovery is by chance, and with printed newspapers it says takes longer to produce. This is incorrect. It does not take longer to produce printed newspapers. Even if it does take longer to produce, then the price elasticity of supply would have been lower. It would not have been higher. So B is incorrect. C, it says research and development is essential for a new drug, which is correct. And excess capacity in printing for printed newspapers. Excess capacity in printing will result in the PES to be a greater value, thus a more elastic price elasticity of supply. And research and development, if they are essential for a new drug, that would mean that the price elasticity of supply will be quite low as compared to the newspapers. So C is the correct option. In case the new drug has a low PES and the printed newspapers have a high PES, as is asked by the question. 7, it says which change would cause the supply curve of sugar sweetened drinks to shift to the right? A, it says a fall in the price of sugar. This is correct, because if sugar's price falls, the cost of production for sugar sweetened drinks will decrease, it will fall, which will result in their production to increase and thus their supply curve to shift outwards or to the right. So A is the correct option. B, it says a removal of a subsidy on sugar. If a subsidy on sugar is removed, what will happen is that the supply will shift inwards. So it is incorrect. C, it says an increase in consumer income. If consumer income increases, it will likely result in an increase in aggregate demand. And D, it says an increase of a specific tax on sugar. If we impose a specific tax on sugar, sugar's price will rise, thus the cost of production will rise, and the supply will shift inwards rather than to the right. So A is our correct option for 7. 8, it says the demand for tablets increases while the cost of producing them decreases. Demand for tablets increases, which means the demand curve shifts to the right, and the cost of producing them decreases, which means the supply shifts to the right. And it is clearly shown that demand is increasing and supply is increasing, which means the equilibrium quantity will have to increase. But since we do not know by what quantity the demand is rising or by what quantity the supply is rising, we cannot tell the change in the price. Therefore, it is uncertain. The price is uncertain and the quantity will surely increase. So C is our correct option for 8. 9, it says what is necessary to achieve the best allocation of resources using the price mechanism. A, producers can maximize their collective interest. This will not result in the best allocation of resources because there will be some negative externalities and there will be overconsumption and underconsumption if this is to be taken in some goods such as merit and demerit goods. And B, it says consumers and producers must have perfect knowledge. This is true because when consumers have perfect knowledge about the harm of a good, such as a demerit good, and they also have perfect knowledge about the benefits that a merit good provides, then the externalities resulting from both goods will be internalized, thus resulting in the optimum allocation or best allocation of resources using the price mechanism. So B is correct. C, it says the government must be able to apply maximum and minimum prices. This does not result in the best allocation of resources because, as we know, that maximum prices and minimum prices both can result in black markets, which may result in government failure and market failure in a lot of cases. So that is not correct as well. D, it says the value of the price elasticity of supply must be greater than 1. It is not necessary that the supply elasticity should be greater than 1 for the best allocation of resources. So yeah, B is our correct answer to 9. 10, it says good X, Y, and Z all have downward sloping demand curves and upward sloping supply curves. Good X is in joint supply with good Y and in joint demand with good Z. So this means if the demand for X increases, therefore the supply of X will increase definitely, which will result in the supply of Y to increase as well because Y is in joint supply with X. For example, if we take an example of sheep, if the sheep is demanded more, the meat of the sheep is demanded more, so along with the meat, the wool would also have to be supplied, so that will increase the supply of wool. Therefore, if two goods are in joint supply, if one's demand increases, definitely the other's supply will increase. So if good X demand increases, the supply of good Y will increase because they are in joint supply. And since good X is in joint demand with good Z, if the demand for good X increases, the demand for good Z will also increase. It is because, for example, if car and petrol, they are in joint demand, they are demanded together, they are complements to each other. If the demand for cars increase, definitely the demand for petrol will increase as well. Now they are asking what will happen to the prices and sales of goods Y and Z. Now since we have deduced that the supply of good Y will increase and the demand of good Z will increase, let's see the possible answers. 8 says there will be a fall in the price of good Y and there will be a fall in sales. There will not be a fall in sales. That is incorrect. B, it says there will be a fall in the price of Y and there will be a rise in sales. This is correct because whenever supply increases, sales increase, and as a result, the price falls. So that could be correct. But let's see with Z. We can see that the price of Z, they've said that it rises, and the sales of Z, they also rise. This is also correct because when demand rises, the sales rise, definitely, and ultimately as a result, the price rises as well. So B is our correct option. 11, it says what is meant by consumer surplus. Consumer surplus is the difference between what a consumer wants to pay and what he actually pays. So let's see the possible options. A, it says it is the amount by which the price consumers are willing to pay exceeds the market price. This is the correct answer because it is definitely mentioning what consumer surplus is. So A is correct for 11. 12, it says, what does the assumption ceteris paribus mean when economists analyze the way in which the quantity demanded of a good changes? Ceteris paribus is the assumption that all other factors are constant except one variable. So let's see the options. A. Changes in quantity demanded can cause changes in any of the other variables. Incorrect. B. Consumer preferences are always assumed to remain unchanged. No. Incorrect. C. Only one variable is assumed to change while the others remain the same. This perfectly coincides with the definition of ceteris paribus in economics. It is correct. D. Several variables change simultaneously. Wrong again. So C is the correct answer to 12. 13, it says the diagram shows the demand curve for a nominal product, which 2 points indicate a move from a price inelastic point to a less price inelastic point. Now, along this demand curve, the price elasticity decreases as we go down. And since the W and the X are above the middle point, the PED for them will be greater than 1. So A and B are incorrect altogether. Then C says Y to Z. From Y to Z, the PED becomes more inelastic because the PED value decreases. And in D, from Z to Y, the PED value rises, so it becomes less price inelastic. So D is the correct option for 13. 14, it says the diagram shows the effect on the market for rice of a change in government policy that causes a shift in the supply curve from S1 to S2. What does the area JKLM represent? A, it says the cost to the government of a subsidy to rice growers. This is correct because this area JKLM shows the subsidy which has caused the supply to shift outwards. So it is correct. B, it says the extra saving to importers of the removal of a tariff on rice. This is incorrect because the saving is to the producers, not to the one who buys them. C, it says the increase in consumer surplus from the introduction of a maximum price for rice. This is incorrect. Maximum price does not cause a shift in the supply curve, firstly, and the diagram that illustrates it is definitely does not coincide with how we draw up consumer surplus. So C is also incorrect. D, the loss in government revenue from the reduction in a lump sum tax on rice. This is incorrect because it is indirect taxes that are imposed on the supply of goods. Lump sum tax are imposed directly on the person, such as corporation tax and income tax. So this is an indirect tax and it is not a lump sum tax. So D is incorrect. The correct answer is A. 15, it says the table shows 4 categories of government expenditure over 2 time periods. By how much had transfer payments changed between periods 1 and 2? Now, in these 4 categories, welfare benefits and state pensions are transfer payments, which are payments done for non-productive work. So as we can see, the welfare benefits decreased from 600 to 450, which is minus 150, and the state pensions increased from 1100 to 1350, which is plus 250. So plus 250 minus 150 equals plus 100, which is our answer. So let's see. By how much had transfer payments changed between periods 1 and 2? B is our correct answer, plus 100. 16, it says which type of tax used in different countries is a direct tax. Now direct tax is a type of tax that cannot be passed on towards a third party. It needs to be paid directly by the first person on whom the tax is imposed. So corporation tax in India, that is imposed on the profits of companies. So the companies would have to pay this corporation tax by themselves. They cannot pass it to another third person. So it is a direct tax. B, import duties in Brazil that are imposed on imported goods. This can be passed on to consumers by the producers, so it is not a direct tax, it is an indirect tax. C, specific tax in South Africa imposed on the purchase of cigarettes. Specific tax is again an indirect tax because the producers can pass on some of the tax to the consumers. D, it says stamp duty in Malaysia, that is a tax on the purchase of a residential property. This is again not a direct tax because it can again be passed on towards the third party, which is the purchaser and the seller. So A is the answer to 16. Let's move on towards 17. It says a government imposes a maximum price on medical face masks below the market equilibrium. What is most likely effect of this? So government has imposed a maximum price which is below the market equilibrium. What will be the effect of this? They're asking. A, it says some consumers will be unable to buy face masks at the maximum price. This is correct because there's always a shortage when there is a maximum price imposed below the equilibrium price, because the suppliers reduce their supply due to lower price and the consumers increase their demand due to lower price, which causes a shortage in the market, and this will result in some consumers being able to buy the face mask at the maximum price while all others will not be able to get the face mask at the maximum price. To understand it better, let's draw a diagram. Now this is the supply and this is the demand. This is the equilibrium price, and if a government imposes a maximum price below the equilibrium price, for example here as P1, what happens is that this is the quantity supplied in the market and this is the quantity demanded in the market. Now these consumers from origin to QS, they will be able to avail the product at the maximum price, and all these consumers from QS to QD will not be able to avail the product at the maximum price because the producers have decreased their supply and the demand has increased, which has caused a shortage in the market, and thus some consumers will be able to get the product at the maximum price and some will not be able to get the product at the maximum price, as we've shown here. So A is correct because it states that some consumers will not be able to buy face masks at the maximum price. B, firms will produce more masks to meet the excess demand at the maximum price. This is incorrect. Firms will not produce more masks to meet the excess demand because they're offered a lower price, and whenever producers are offered a lower price, since their profits tend to decrease, they produce less. C, poorer consumers will be able to obtain all the masks they need at the maximum price, as we've already shown that some consumers will not be able to obtain the masks at the maximum price. Therefore, this option is incorrect. D says the market will clear at the maximum price. The market will not clear at the maximum price because there will be an excess demand. The demand would exceed the supply, so there will be no clearance in the market. There will be no equilibrium in the market at the maximum price. So D is also incorrect. So A is our correct option for 17. 18, it says what is not a producer subsidy. A grant given to cover losses in a grant given to cover losses in an essential industry such as the rail industry. It is a producer subsidy. B, a guaranteed minimum price paid to farmers to ensure the long run supply of food. Again, it is a producer subsidy to support the farmers. C, financial assistance given to a pharmaceutical company to develop a new vaccine. Again, it is a grant, it is a subsidy. And finally, D, a payment made to the unemployed to allow them to buy essential goods and services. Now, this is a grant not to the producers, but to the unemployed people, so it is not a producer subsidy, it is a transfer payment, and therefore it is the correct answer. 19, it says the diagram shows an aggregate demand curve AD. What is measured on the horizontal x-axis and the vertical y-axis? So they're asking what is measured on y here and what is measured on x here. And since we know that on x the real GDP of the country is measured and on y the price level is measured, so let's see the answers. On the horizontal x-axis, the real GDP is measured, and on the vertical y-axis, the price level is measured. So C is the correct option. 20. What could explain an improvement in the terms of trade for a country? A, an increase in tariffs on imports that will cause import prices to rise, and thus it will not result in an improvement in the terms of trade. So it is incorrect. B, a decrease in the volume of imports sold. Terms of trade is not concerned with the volume or quantity of imports and exports. It is concerned with the prices of exports and imports. C, an increase in the prices of exports. This is the correct option because if exports price increase, there will be an improvement in the terms of trade. D, it says a decrease in the volume of exports sold. Again, terms of trade is not concerned with the volume of exports and imports, so C is our correct option. 21. What is a correct description of an aggregate demand curve? A, it is a curve obtained by adding the market demand curves of all consumer goods traded in an economy. A does not show the accurate definition of aggregate demand, which is the total demand of goods and services within the country at each and every price level. That is the perfect definition for aggregate demand, and it is not clearly mentioned in this option A. So B, it says it is a curve determined by the horizontal summation of all individual consumer demand curves for a product. That will help us get the market demand curve for a product, not the aggregate demand curve of a country. C, it is a curve that shows the total amount of goods and services firms are willing to buy at a given price in an economy. This is incorrect. It is not only firms that are willing to buy, it is also consumers that are willing to buy, and it is not just willing to buy, it is also are able to buy. They should be willing and able to buy, and then it would be called an effective demand. Finally, D says it is a curve that shows the total demand of all goods and services produced at all price levels in an economy. Yes, this is the one, as I mentioned earlier, this is the perfect definition for aggregate demand within an economy. You cannot just say that it is a total amount of all goods and services produced. You also have to mention at all price levels, because that is what makes up a curve. The combination of price and quantity results in a curve to be formed. So that is the correct definition for aggregate demand curve. 22nd, it says the data in the table is extracted from the Singapore balance of payments for 2019. What was the value of the trade balance on the current account in 2019? Now, to get the trade balance, we'll add the balance of trading goods and the balance of trading services. So let's see, 134,000 plus 8,000 results in 142,000. So that is the answer. That is the current account trade balance. So let's see the answers. B, I think, is the correct answer for this one. 23, a household's income increased by 3% over the same period. The rate of inflation was also 3%. Which statement is correct? A, both the nominal income of the household and the real income of the household increased by 3%. This is incorrect due to the change in income being equal to the change in price level, which is 3% cancels out 3%, the rate of inflation cancels out the positive change in the income, so there is zero change in the real income, which means the real income has stayed constant, so A is incorrect. B, the nominal income of the household remained unchanged. This is incorrect. The nominal income is clearly mentioned that it increased by 3%. C, it says the nominal income of the household increased by 3% while the real income of the household remained unchanged. This is the correct option because the nominal income rose by 3% and the real income was unchanged as we know it. So C is the correct option to 23. 24. A country operates a fixed exchange rate. There is a major fall of international confidence in its government's economic policies. What is likely to be the result? A fall in its foreign exchange rate. There will not likely be a fall in the foreign exchange rate because it is a fixed exchange rate and it is not determined by market forces of demand and supply. So even if the international confidence decreases, the demand for the currency decreases, the exchange rate will not fall because it is a fixed exchange rate. It is determined by governmental policies, not by the forces of demand and supply. B, a fall in its foreign exchange reserves. This is the correct option because when international confidence is decreased in the government's economic policies, people will start to withdraw their capital or their funds from the economy, which will result in the international currencies with the economy to decrease, thus reducing the foreign exchange reserves within the country. So B is correct. And C says a rise in its capital inflows. This is incorrect. There will be a rise in capital outflows because people will withdraw funds and money from the economy, not inject it into the economy. So C is also incorrect. D, a rise in its terms of trade. Terms of trade depends on the prices of exports and imports. If it does affect terms of trade whatsoever, then there has to be a fall in the terms of trade because a loss of international confidence will mean the demand for exports will decrease, which will decrease the price for exports, and thus it will result in a fall in the terms of trade. That could be a better option, a fall in the terms of trade, but it is very unlikely that this will affect the exports and imports to much of a greater extent. So D is incorrect as well, and B is our correct option for this one. 25, it says in 2018, the inflation rate in Argentina was over 100%. Which combination correctly identifies the winners and losers during this period? As far as I remember, in 2018 World Cup, Argentina lost and France won in the round of 16. So the winners will be France and losers will be Argentina. So let's see the options. Oh, I'm just kidding. So they say if inflation is so high, who are going to be the winners and losers in the economy of Argentina? A, it says firms selling goods abroad. Those firms that are selling goods abroad will not be the winners because the prices of their exports will be quite high, thus their prices will be quite uncompetitive. So the demand for their goods will fall. They will be kind of losers in this period of high inflation. So A is incorrect. B, firms unable to decrease real wages. This means they are losers because if they cannot decrease the real wages of the workers, their costs of production will rise exponentially, which will result in their profits to decrease, and thus they will be forced to exit the markets in most cases. So B is incorrect as well. C, it says individuals with a high amount of debt at a fixed rate of interest. Those individuals can be the winners because they have a high debt and they are paying a fixed rate of interest, which means if they borrowed $100 initially for a 5-year span and each year they repay $20 installment, and let's assume the interest rate is 10%, so they will have to pay $20 for the installment and $10 for the interest rate, which will result in $30. Now they are paying $30 after the 100% inflation rate in the Argentina economy, which means the $100 they borrowed were much higher in value because in that time inflation was lower so they got higher money, as compared to now they are paying less real money to the one from which they borrowed, because now the value of money has decreased. So in that case they will be the winners. In C, losers are households that hold most of their assets in cash. Yes, definitely they will be losers, because cash will lose its real value in such a high inflation rate, so they will be the losers. C is our correct option. And D, it says the winners are workers on fixed wage contracts. When they are on fixed wage contracts, for example, if in year one inflation is 10%, they're still getting $100, and in year two inflation is 100%, they're still getting $100, because it's a fixed wage contract, so they're getting the same wage each year. So in first year the real value of their wage is 90, and in second year the real value of their wage is about 0 if we adjust it for inflation. So they are the losers, not the winners in this case. So D is also incorrect in that regard. So C is the correct answer for this one. 25th. 26th, it says the diagram shows the aggregate demand and aggregate supply for a country. The initial equilibrium is at point E. Let's see. So this is the initial equilibrium. Now they are saying the sum of the price elasticities of demand for imports and exports for this country exceeds 1, which means the Marshall-Lerner condition is true in this scenario. A devaluation of the country's exchange rate will cause aggregate demand to change. What will be the new equilibrium? Whenever Marshall-Lerner condition is fulfilled, or the PED sum for imports and exports is greater than 1, what happens that a devaluation will result in exports to rise in value and imports to fall in value, because exports are now cheaper and imports are now expensive, and they both have elastic demand. So in that case exports value will rise and imports value will fall, which means the aggregate demand of the economy will rise, as we know that exports and imports are the components of aggregate demand, along with consumption, investment, and government spending. So let's see the answer. So if the aggregate demand shifts outwards, B is the correct option. So B is the answer. 27. In 2000, Japan was Asia's largest exporter of electrical components, but by 2018, it was ranked 8th. What might explain this change? Japan has a lower opportunity cost in electrical component production than its Asian competitors. It is incorrect, because if Japan had lower opportunity cost for electrical components, it would not have fallen to 8th rank in the production of electrical components. B, it says Japan has experienced greater deflation than its Asian competitors. If Japan had experienced greater deflation, it means its exports would have been much cheaper and their value would have been much greater, and Japan would have retained its position as the largest exporter of electrical components. C, it says Japan has imposed tariffs on the import of electrical components from its Asian competitors. If Japan had imposed tariffs, that means the imports from Asian competitors would decrease, therefore Japan would retain its position in the export market of electrical components. D, it says the Japanese yen has appreciated against the currency of its Asian competitors. Yes, this is true, because if Japan's yen has appreciated, which means their export will become expensive, thus the demand for their exports will fall, and thus it will result in Japan to become a smaller exporter of electrical components by 2018, as opposed to the largest exporter, which it was in 2000. So D is the correct option for 27. 28, it says which measure to correct a balance of payments current account deficit would be classified as an expenditure reducing policy. Now there are two types of policy for expenditures. One is expenditure reducing policies and one is expenditure switching policies. Expenditure reducing policies are to reduce expenditures and to not shift it to another types of goods and services, to reduce it absolutely. And expenditure switching policies are policies which switch expenditure from one type of product to another type of product. It does not reduce expenditure, it just switches the expenditure. For example, if a country switches the expenditure from its imports to its domestic goods, it would be called an expenditure switching policy. And if it reduces the overall aggregate demand in the economy, it would be called as an expenditure reducing policy. So A, it says a reduction in interest rates. A reduction in interest rates is actually an expenditure increasing policy. It is not an expenditure reducing policy, because if we reduce interest rates, cost of borrowing will fall, and when cost of borrowing falls, producers and consumers both borrow more funds, and when they borrow more funds, they consume more and they invest more, which increases the aggregate demand in the economy, which increases the expenditure in the economy. So A is completely incorrect. B, a revaluation of the currency. A revaluation of the currency would be an expenditure switching policy, because since imports will become cheaper, people will tend to buy more imports in place of domestic goods. So they will switch their expenditure from domestic goods towards imports. So it is an expenditure switching policy, not an expenditure reducing policy. C, it says an increase in direct taxes. This is an expenditure reducing policy, because if direct taxes are increased, people have less disposable income, firms have less disposable retained earnings, which means their expenditure will reduce in absolute terms, because now they have less money to spend, which will reduce the expenditure. So C is the correct option. D, it says an introduction of foreign exchange controls. It is again going to be an expenditure switching policy, because when foreign exchange controls are implemented, what happens is that people can buy less of the foreign currency and thus less of imports, thus they will have to take those funds and spend it in the domestic economy. So it will be classified as an expenditure switching policy. So D is incorrect, and C is our correct answer to 28, because an increase in direct taxes is an expenditure reducing policy. 29, it says the diagram shows the aggregate demand and aggregate supply curves for an economy. Which government action is most likely to cause the equilibrium position to move from X to Y? So initially AS1 is the initial supply curve, and AD1 is the initial demand curve, and X is the initial equilibrium. So they say which government action is most likely to cause the equilibrium position to move from X to Y. So let's see which position is Y. Y means that there is an increase in aggregate demand from AD1 to AD2, and also an increase in aggregate supply from AS1 to AS2. So we have to find an option which results in both an increase in aggregate supply and an increase in aggregate demand. A, it says an increase in the exchange rate that makes locally produced goods less price competitive both at home and abroad. This is not correct, because if the price competitiveness is very less for the local goods, what will happen is that the exports will fall, which will result in a fall in aggregate demand. So it is not correct. B, an increase in government spending on infrastructure that increases the production potential of the economy. B is correct, because an increase in government spending will definitely increase aggregate demand, and government spending on infrastructure will improve the long-term productive potential of the economy, which will shift the supply curve outwards as well. So B is our correct option. C says an increase in interest rates that increases the cost of borrowing. An increase in interest rates will decrease the aggregate demand. We have discussed it many times. So it is incorrect. D, an increase in real wages of labor. If real wages of labor increase, cost of production will rise, and the aggregate supply within the economy will decrease because of higher costs of production. So D is incorrect as well, and B is correct, because it shifts both the aggregate supply curve outwards and the aggregate demand curve outwards, and which is demonstrated by the equilibrium point Y, which shows that aggregate demand shifts outwards and aggregate supply shifts outwards as well. 30, and the final one, it says a country is suffering from severe deflation. What is most likely to prevent the deflation from worsening? A, increasing income tax to help reduce the government's budget deficit. If we increase income tax, aggregate demand in the economy will decrease and deflation will become more severe. B, increasing interest rates to encourage more saving. Also incorrect, because if people save more, they will consume less and aggregate demand will be less, which means deflation will worsen even more. C, increasing transfer payments to reduce inequality of income. This will be correct, because
it means there will be higher government spending, which will increase the aggregate demand in the economy and prevent the deflation from worsening. So C is the correct option. Finally, D, revaluing the currency to bring in more revenue from exports. If we revalue the currency, what will happen is that exports will become expensive and imports will become cheaper. So imports value will increase, imports volume will increase, and exports volume will decrease, which means the aggregate demand will decrease, and that will worsen the deflation even more. So C is our correct option for 30. And that's all for today. Do let me know in the comments if you have problem with any question, if you are confused with any question of this paper, and also let me know in the comments which paper you want to do next, which variant, which session. And until then, goodbye, take care.